So welcome everyone, and thank you for joining us at today's webinar on the Essential Services Commission's advice on the local government maximum interest rate on unpaid rates and charges. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Rebecca Billings and I am one of the commissioners at the Essential Services Commission. I'd like to start today's webinar by acknowledging the traditional owners of all the lands we are meeting on today. For me, that's the land of the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nations. I also acknowledge the traditional owners of the various lands that you are on today and any Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people participating today. I pay my respects to elders past and present and the Aboriginal elders of other communities who may also be here today. On behalf of my fellow commissioners, I would like to emphasise how pleased the Commission is to be here today, to present the approach to our advice and to hear directly from stakeholders. I would like to introduce senior leaders and Commission staff in attendance today. Accompanying me is Marcus Crudden, our Executive Director of Price Monitoring and Regulation. I am also joined by Angelina Garcias, our Director of the Local Government team, who will lead today's presentation on our advice to setting the maximum interest rate. Marcus and Angelina are supported by the Local Government project team led by Patrick Ho. We are here today because the Commission values direct and transparent engagement with all our stakeholders. And on that note, I would also like to welcome our guest speakers. Thank you to Kira Sterling from Thriving Communities Partnership and Hannah Cook from Recoveries Corp, April Ura from Hobsons Bay City Council, and Joe Murdoch from North East Water for joining us today. Thank you all, and I look forward to hearing your presentations later. We have had close to 120 RSVPs today, so I'm looking forward to seeing all of you online. There are representatives from councils, peak bodies, and community and consumer advocate groups. I would like to warmly welcome all of you today. I'm really pleased to see the turnout and acknowledge the expertise in the room. I also acknowledge the time investment that some of you have already made to this issue. Today's webinar is about explaining our advice on setting the maximum interest rate on unpaid rates and charges for local government, and perspectives from other thought leaders on a range of related issues. This webinar is also the opportunity to answer any questions and listen to the views you might have about our advice. Before we start the session, I wanted to speak to you a bit about our role and what brought us to this stage. In the second reading speech, the aims of the maximum interest rate mechanism were made clear. The ministerial guidelines will require councils to proactively work with ratepayers experiencing financial hardship to explore different arrangements and solutions, and more punitive actions such as legal actions and the application of penalty interest will only be available when ratepayers refuse to engage and all other approaches are exhausted. Our work on vulnerability in other sectors has highlighted the impacts of the interest rate on unpaid rates and charges on vulnerable people, particularly those facing hardship and financial hardship. In late October 2022, we were asked by the Minister for Local Government to provide our initial advice on the content of hardship guidelines for the local government sector. We were pleased to provide our preliminary advice on this matter in February 23. This advice was built on the Victorian Ombudsman report of 2021, which highlighted poor experiences ratepayers in financial hardship face when struggling to pay their rates. It was also drawn from our engagement with numerous stakeholders, as well as from our deep knowledge of consumer vulnerability and expertise in developing consumer protection frameworks in other related sectors. We have now been asked to advise on the development of a maximum interest rate on unpaid rates and charges. We note that our role is not to determine the maximum interest rate itself. Instead, it is just to provide advice to the Minister on the setting of this maximum rate and to promote better practice within the sector. We acknowledge that the sector is taking steps to improve how it supports ratepayers experiencing hardship, and that moves towards contemporary practices will take time. There is scope to learn from each other and from other sectors such as banking and insurance, energy and water. The team has met with many of you in the last few months, building a picture of what should inform our approach. I would like to extend my appreciation to all of those who have contributed to the work to date. I'll now hand over to Angelina to give you an overview of our advice on the maximum interest rate. Thanks everyone, and over to you, Angelina.
Thank you, Rebecca. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Angelina Garcias and I'm the Director overseeing the Commission's Local Government Work Program. Before we get into the session, I'd like to draw your attention to some important housekeeping. We are recording this webinar and you'll see that your cameras and microphones have been turned off to minimise interruptions. The link to the recording will be shared with all registered participants after the webinar. To enhance accessibility, you have the option to active live caption within Teams. As we go through the webinar, you can put any questions you might have in the question answer tab. We'll be monitoring this and we'll respond at the end of each session. You can also use the raise hand function and we will allow you to unmute your microphone and camera and bring you into the discussion. Over the next few slides, I will take us through the Commission's approach and then pass us on to our guest speakers to share some of their perspectives. You'll just see that a bit of a survey has popped up just to get a bit of an idea of sort of the representation of the people in the webinar today. So if you could fill that in, that would be helpful. So in 2022, the Act was amended in response to recommendations made by the Victorian Ombudsman and the Local Government Rating System Review. At the time, the Minister for Local Government stated that these changes were necessary to ensure people struggling to pay their rates are not being driven further into debt or out of their homes. Following those amendments, the Minister can now set a maximum rate of interest on unpaid rates and charges, but must first seek the Commission's advice. In February, the Minister asked us to provide advice by the end of April. Since then, we have undertaken targeted consultation, including one-on-one meetings with council peak bodies and community groups. And we also hosted a workshop with these stakeholders to take them through our proposed approach and to test our thinking. It is important to note that ultimately the Minister is responsible for setting the maximum interest rate. We will ask the Minister to make our advice public after the rate has been announced, but again, that will be her decision. So what must our advice cover? So under the Act, we're required to consider 4 matters, including the needs of ratepayers facing financial hardship, the need for disincentives for payment, council financing costs, and prevailing commercial rates of interest. So in balancing these 4 matters, we have been guided by the second reading speech, which states that this amendment will ensure the maximum interest rate amount, which is currently 10%, does not place those experiencing financial hardship under even more financial strain and is proportionate for unpaid local government rates and charges. At its essence, we have been tasked with developing a methodology that minimises the potential for further financial strain on ratepayers experiencing hardship and is proportionate. That is, it's not too low or too high from a council's perspective. So in doing so, we've asked ourselves 3 questions. First, how do we balance the needs of ratepayers facing financial hardship against their needs for disincentives for late payment, which is about the first 2 matters we must consider? Second, how do we estimate the financial cost to councils incurred because of late payment of rates, which is about the last 2 matters we must consider? And then we also asked ourselves, well, when should the rate be reviewed? So how do we go about balancing the needs of ratepayers facing financial hardship against the disincentives for late payment. A cost-reflective interest rate strikes a good balance between the impacts on ratepayers facing hardship and providing disincentives for late payments. While some councils currently apply interest for unpaid rates and charges below the current cap of 10%, many impose the penalty interest rate as the default. Consumer groups have told us that this punitive approach drives ratepayers facing hardship away, reducing the likelihood of them seeking council support. Councils should be proactively identifying and supporting ratepayers experiencing hardship. We know from our work in other sectors that this helps both ratepayers and councils. For example, Yarra Valley Water's water care program saw a 50% reduction in the number of supported customers whose debt levels exceeded $1,000 and led to a 168% increase in customers transitioning back to mainstream payment plans. But even with the most proactive debt management processes in place, there will always be ratepayers who fall into arrears. The harm caused by a punitive interest rate and the risk of building up debts to unmanageable levels is disproportionate to any disincentive to pay from a higher interest rate. Councils have other powers they can to pursue ratepayers who have not paid, including pursuing court orders that can include penalty interest and the ability to sell land to recover unpaid rates. While these powers are restricted for ratepayers facing hardship, they remain an effective collections mechanism and deterrent for bad actors who may choose not to pay their rates. Setting a rate that is too high has the potential to provide a perverse incentive to councils against proactive debt management. The higher the gap between the actual cost to councils associated with late payment and the interest rate received, the stronger the financial incentive to not proactively pursue debts. So how do we balance the need? Oh, we're still talking about balancing the needs of ratepayers and the need for a disincentive. The Act provides councils with discretion when it comes to charging interest on unpaid rates and charges. Councils may exempt any person, waive interest for concession card holders, or for anyone who applies because of financial hardship. We've been told that many councils are already doing the right things in terms of supporting ratepayers experiencing hardship. On the other hand, we continue to hear from community groups that councils are behind other sectors. We know from our experience in other sectors that early support means ratepayers will be less likely to accrue high levels of debt. We also know that it is not always easy to identify if someone is experiencing hardship. Service providers often rely on people self-identifying as being in hardship, and many people may not feel comfortable self-identifying or be aware of the support that is available. In terms of better practice approaches to debt management, councils should, as a matter of policy, not charge interest for ratepayers holding concession cards or on payment plans. They should also waive any interest already accrued when a ratepayer is subsequently found by the council to be experiencing hardship. Council should only use coercive measures such as legal action or debt collection as measures of last resort. So how do we go about estimating the financial cost to councils incurred as a result of late payment of rates? The interest rate levied on late payments should reflect the financing costs a council would face if it had to replace that lost revenue. In other words, a council could borrow the money that it would otherwise have received. Setting an interest rate consistent with council financing costs means the impact on councils should be neutral. That is, they should not be losing money, but nor should they be making money off the unpaid rates and charges. Councils now primarily borrow through Treasury Corporation of Victoria, as their rates outperform commercial lenders when lending to local government. Given this, we're proposing that the maximum interest rate be based on TCV's interest rates, including the administration and guarantee fees that are also levied. We consider that on balance, this approach best meets the four matters we need to consider. I'm unable to give you the number today as we're still waiting on the most up-to-date data to incorporate that into our advice. And although this approach will result in a number that is below commercial borrowing rates, we consider that it is appropriate because it reflects the actual rates that all councils could borrow at. So under the Act, the Minister can set the maximum interest rate from time to time. So one of the issues we consulted on was how often the rate should be set. Given that our approach is to adopt a cost-reflective methodology and financing costs change in line with changing market conditions, it's our view that the Minister should set the maximum interest rate annually to ensure it is kept as cost-reflective as possible. So by way of comparison, the current penalty interest rate of 10% has stayed the same since the 1st of February 2017, while the maximum interest rate we set for water businesses, also using a cost-reflective methodology, has ranged from 2.9 to 6.9% in that time. Under the Act, any new maximum interest rate set by the Minister comes into effect from 1 July of the next financial year. So our view is that it should be set by 30 April each year to ensure that the most up-to-date data can be used while still allowing councils time to reflect the number in their budgets. So that's it for me in terms of providing a high-level overview of what we're proposing to have in our advice to the Minister. As I said earlier, we're providing that advice to the Minister on the 30th of April, which is tomorrow. So before we move on to our guest speakers, does anyone have any questions specifically for us? If you don't have any questions now, you can raise them as part of the later sessions. Yeah, I'll just remind you that you can put your hand up or put something in the Q&A. Okay, so I've just got so we did ask for some questions beforehand. So one of the questions that we got beforehand was, I think, sort of making a comparison between what happens in water and in local government. The questions around water companies provide a service which they are able to switch off if people can't pay. Councils aren't the same as water companies. We just can't cut people off. So we shouldn't be compared to water. I think in terms of cutting people off or denying people access to a service, water businesses are only able to restrict. And our understanding is that given their more modern sort of contemporary approaches to hardship means that most of them very rarely restrict customers now because they're undertaking a more proactive approach in terms of dealing with customers. They're also less likely to take legal action because they've seen, I guess, those benefits from that proactive actions that they've been able to take. I guess the other thing in terms of comparing water to local government is in both cases they are a charge on the property. Water also has the ability to put liens on properties, as does local government, but local governments is the first charge on the property. So ultimately, local councils will get their money back when the property is sold or transferred. So, there any other questions? I think we've got a question for most councils release their draft budget in early to mid-April. End of April would mean no opportunity for community to gauge on this rates. Could this be brought forward to the end of March? I think we're trying to balance between having the most up-to-date data and then balancing the ability of councils to incorporate that into their budgets. I think originally we had talked about maybe making it May, and then after feedback from our earlier consultation, we brought it back to April. I guess, we might be able to think about whether March makes sense, but again, because we're trying to just make sure that we've got the most up-to-date data, perhaps March may be a little bit too early. And TCB does release indicative data, which could be used. TCB does release its data, and that could be used as an indicative rate for councils when they're thinking about their budget processes and what they might want to consult in terms of consulting on their budgets with their communities. So there's a question here about what would the rate be, or if we could give an indicative rate, just to compare to the 10%. I'm not really able to give a number, but it's going to be less than 10%. So I think, as an example, Waters last year was around 6. So it's definitely going to be less than 10. As to how far below that, it's a bit difficult to give that number. We've also got another question about the actions taken by Yarra Valley Water in their work on identifying customers and financial hardship. I think we would definitely point people in the right direction if they want to learn a little bit more about what Yarra Valley Water is doing. We've also got Northeast Water speaking later on in the session, and I'll take us through a bit about what they're doing. Any other questions? If not, I might hand over to our next speaker. So we have Kira Sterling from the Thriving Communities Partnership. So I'd like to introduce Kira, if Kira's out there and can put her camera on. So I've lost Kira. Here she is. So Kira Sterling is the Chief Executive Officer of the Thriving Communities Partnership. Thriving Communities Partnership serves as a consumer advocacy organisation and will share with us valuable insights from the perspective of a customer advocate. Thanks.
Thanks. Thanks so much, Angelina, and thank you for having me. I would also like to pay my respects and acknowledge the traditional owners of the lands we're meeting on today. And I'm out here in the east of Melbourne on the lands of the Wurundjeri people in this cold and cloudy day. It's probably better that it was today than yesterday. I also want to really acknowledge that when we're talking about vulnerability, which is part of the conversation I'm having today, we can't do that without acknowledging the vulnerabilities that were beset upon Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people through colonisation, but also to recognise, we're here today to have chats, to learn from each other, to have conversations, to tell stories, and that is such a rich part of our Aboriginal culture and the culture of the traditional owners of this land. So I would like to pay my respects to any Aboriginal people on the call today, and also pay my respects to elders past and present. So, gosh, it's been a tough time, hasn't it? I think we've seen so many, my conversation here today, I guess, is really looking at the state of play for humans across this country and across this state. And look, we're Victorians, so I think we know we've kind of had it tougher than everybody else. We had 26 years of lockdown, which had quite a compounding effect across our community. This weekend we have seen marches across the country about the absolute crisis we are currently in when it comes to violence against women, and we know that we're seeing violence and economic abuse increase to a rate that is it's just extraordinary that we are continuing to see these issues flow out. It is, and look, this is a tough conversation because there's tough stuff going on in the world right now, and we're seeing, over 50%, up to 75% of people are saying they're really, really struggling to keep on top of their bills at the moment. And we're all in this room. We are all bill payers. We are all experiencing life, and I'm sure many people in this room have those moments and know people experience it themselves where they are feeling that pinch of the cost of living crisis. We know through things like Food Bank, for example, 77% of people experiencing food insecurity and accessing food pantry services, which is really the canary in the coal mine, 77% hadn't actually needed to access that before, and last year was their first year. We know that over 50% of people, in fact, it's something in the vicinity of 61 or 62% have full-time employment, and they're still seeking food support. And we also know that well over a third actually have a mortgage. So that's in the local government space, these are your people, this is your community. And when you're accessing things like food services, you know that you are really, really in that pinch point. We have heard across, and I'm sure you've heard this from your community itself and from the community organisations I'm sure you all engage with. We really see that everybody is in that pinch point. People are choosing to pay bills other than food. People are going without medical supplies. People are making some really, really disheartening choices, because we don't have choice a lot of the time at the moment. We are seeing a significant increase in services like Beyond, Blue and Lifeline, who are again telling us that they are seeing more consumers and more humans coming through that have never reached out for support before. And, I think, Angelina made that point about the fact of how difficult it is to seek support, and some of those barriers. I think I had my dad with me this weekend, and I think of him, and he's Irish and a staunch person who believes you just got to get on with stuff, and you don't tell your stories, and it's nobody's business, and your lot in life is your lot in life. And I think about someone like my dad in the spirit of needing to access support. He would never put his hand up. He's not going to be on this webinar, so sorry, Dad, I'm talking about you in public, but he would not put up his hand for support. And this is what so many of our community are facing, that feeling of shame and embarrassment and pride, and that feeling that somebody else is going to be worse off than me. I can't be the one, I can't be putting my hand up. And, a lot of our support services say that is one of the biggest issues, that people are saying, well, I might be going without food. And we're hearing from many community members. I caught up with the COTA, the Council of the Aging, on Friday, and they were talking about the fact that so many of the older Australians are not putting on their heaters. They're not using electricity because, and in weather conditions where it's cold and there's very significant health impacts for the part of our community, they're having to make these decisions because they don't feel like they have a choice. And so these are the things that people across your community are facing, and local government is so connected into the community. So you would be seeing this all the time. You'd be seeing it through the things that are coming through your maternal health centres. You'll be seeing it through the people that are coming through your libraries, seeing it through the people, with the support services that you offer. People are just doing it tough. In the community sector, we know National Debt Helpline, which I'm sure you all know, and I'm sure you are referring your clients to. We are seeing such significant increases. I am, privileged to sit on the board of Consumer Action Law Centre, which is one of the National Debt Helpline providers, and we are just seeing continual increases coming through and tougher calls. We're seeing mortgage holders, which we really did not see in the past. We've seen the increase in mortgage holders is extraordinary. We are seeing rates as doubling in some of the reasons why people are saying that they're needing that additional support and some of those additional pressures that are coming through. And I was having a conversation, and again, I know I'm having a tough conversation here because it is tough, but I think, back in the day, it was really about keeping a roof over people's heads. Lately, the conversations we're having is how do we make sure somebody doesn't lose their car, because that is the roof over their head. We're seeing people who have mortgages renting out their properties and moving into their cars. Had a conversation with a community worker yesterday on Friday who said that one of their clients is renting out their house, and they're paying a fee to their neighbour to park their caravan in their driveway because they can't afford to live in their house and they don't want to lose it. Like, this is the reality, the really tough reality that we're living with here in our country when we think, we think it's secure and safe, but we are seeing such significant issues across the community, and it's tough. And I imagine the staff in frontline organisations are hearing these tough calls, and it's not easy for your frontline staff. What I've been Thriving Communities Partnership. We're a charity and work across corporate, community, government, essential services, really around how do we keep people connected to their essential services and ensure humans can thrive. And unfortunately, right now, ensure people can survive is the conversations we're having at the moment. And so we work with all of these different organisations across the essential service ecosystem. And I was speaking to some colleagues in a different industry who were saying they had notification from their HR teams that some of their staff had been sleeping in the cars in the car park of their work, and it was notified by security. We're hearing stories of people taking there might be a fruit bowl in the lunch space and people are taking that extra fruit, or they might be taking toilet paper out of the work toilets. So this is everybody that's being impacted. And I think, we are talking about rates. Obviously, I'm from the community sector. Obviously, my angle is around what we need to do to support our humans across this country and this state. But we're also seeing, that I run a company. I also have financial pressures every day in running an organisation and employing people and trying to get, deliver services. And so I get that there's that balance of how do you balance the running of local government with actually supporting the humans that you're serving and your consumers and clients and customers. But I think the reality is there are different ways of of working with people experiencing vulnerability. We have seen, and I saw Yarra Valley Water mentioned, I have a history with them. We've seen organisations really take a shift in what better practice looks like from a collections perspective. And that better practice is really moving from that collections mindset to that assist mindset. It's taking into account that people do not reach out for support, that they don't know the support's available, that they're really sure they are going to get back on track. Flood, that tsunami of things that are coming at them just seems higher and higher and more unmanageable. So we've seen organisations like Yarra Valley Water, for example, who moved from a collections model to an assist model, really understanding what is your affordability to pay, what can people actually afford to pay, and how do we work with people to get in really early and support them at an early stage so that they're not falling off that financial cliff at the end. And making sure you're connecting people to things like payment arrangements, the different concessions, supporting supporting access to connecting them with financial counselling or family violence services, having that kind of wraparound thinking. And when the businesses have taken on that model, Yarra is an example, they did a business case quite some time ago with Boston Consulting, and they've continued to review that. And if there's anyone in the room from Yarra, I'm probably getting this, hopefully I'm getting this right, but it was around about a $5 million cost benefit from moving from a hardline collections to an engagement assist model. NAB, one of Australia's leading banks, went down that path as well many years ago and started to make those changes. And they made an $80 million saving by changing the way they did collections. And why that is because if someone does not have those funds and you are chasing and hitting a wall, it's the old saying that you can't get blood out of a stone. And this is what's happening for people. If you're saying, well, you need to pay 500 and they can only pay 150 at the moment, and you're like, well, if you don't pay the 500, here's your punishment. Well, they're not even going to give you the 150 because what's the point? And so it's really about rethinking that model of engagement, sending 1 million debt collection letters, having a process for hardship responses where you have to fill out 50 forms and you need 36 people to go through the process of signing it off. If you just believe people when they're telling you they're experiencing financial hardship, and most certainly when they're telling you they're experiencing family violence, you are going to create stronger, more trusted relationships, and you are going to actually save money as an organisation. And that's why most organisations across the country now are shifting to that model, because the old school model of punitive punishment just doesn't work. It breaks your relationships with your customers. It hurts your staff because they don't want to be the ones having these conversations, and it costs you money. So when you're looking at efficiencies and you're talking about offsetting that cost of collections, if you're not looking at a better practice model of assist, then you are costing yourselves more money in your collections process. And I heard the conversation around, for example, the water companies being able to disconnect. They can restrict, to Angelina's point, but that's the absolute last straw. And we're not even seeing those things come through, because what they've all realised is early engagement and providing support up front is a better and more cost-effective model. They don't need to go down that pathway because they're having these different relationships and they're getting in early. We've also seen some really great responses from different ways of engaging with community, putting yourself out there. I mean, local government is in the absolute prime position for community engagement. You've got your community health centres, you've got your libraries, you've got your community out there, your people in your workforce out there in the community seeing what's going on. There's so many opportunities for early engagement. And that's where I think the real power is here, that early engagement space. We've got a thing called the One Stop, One Story Hub, where businesses can refer customers experiencing family violence or financial hardship from one organisation to the next through a digital triage system. And what we've seen through OSOS is when someone's presenting in the system somewhere, if we can get them early, it completely changes their trajectory. When we've got everyone working together to lift all boats, people get that support that they need. And this stuff is tough, right? I get that it's tough, but there are so many organisations across the country absolutely leading the way in how an assistance collection model can completely reframe your organisation. And the good thing about them is they want to share it because they want their customer not just to have better support with their water or their energy or their banking. They want that human to be able to thrive. So there are many out here who are available for you to talk to and get advice from and look at different ways of supporting. It's a big group of sharers in the vulnerability and hardship space. So I think there's lots of opportunities to engage and get that engagement and sharing. And then there's other things to think about. Family violence, absolutely front and center with this stuff. We are seeing economic abuse at unfathomable rates. We are seeing products and services being used to perpetrate violence across organisations, and we know that it happens in local governments. We know it happens with rates where your customers are perpetrating abuse through your systems and services. There's a whole piece of work that's been going on called the Design to Disrupt series, which Catherine Fitzpatrick has authored with Centre for Women's Economic Abuse with CWES, and that's really giving some really good insights into thinking about what do we need to be thinking about when we're looking at products and services, including collections, in protecting people through that process. Watch this space because that work is going to be looked at across the utility space in water, energy, and hopefully telco. And I think the Essential Services Commission are really looking at how they can lean into this space. So there's lots of different tools, research, information, and organisations and humans that you can reach out to have these conversations. I might pause there. I know I've just been talking at you for a really long time, and most of the stuff is tough, and I'm probably not invited to any of your barbecues, but this is the reality of what we're talking with, real human lives in real crisis, and those include the people in your organisation too.
Thanks, Kira. Thanks for that. Are there any questions for Kira? Just know that Kira has to rush off after the question. So if you've got any questions, it might be this is the opportunity that we have to ask. One of the questions that we did get earlier, Kira, that I didn't get to, but that we thought might be good to point your way to is the question was, how can we, together with the ESC, ensure engagement across different sectors to ensure consistent identification of and support for those facing hardship? You mentioned the one stop, one shop. I think you're also a big fan of that sharing of that better practice across sectors. And so there's, I think, lots of opportunities for that. Maybe you want to talk a little bit about that.
Oh, look, there is. I think the reality is that we're all working with the same human, right? Whether you're in the bank, whether you're a family violence worker, a community worker, a local government worker, we're all working with the same people. And those people, if they're experiencing crisis or family violence or financial hardship with one of us, they're experiencing it with all of us. So the more consistent and aligned we can be, the better we are. And TCP's obviously big advocates for sharing. There are a multitude of ways that support is available, and there is a whole network. You can jump on our website. The website itself, we're a charity, good luck searching your way through it, but we do have a knowledge centre, and there's lots of information on that around what some of the better practice guides are. You can go to the Economic Abuse Reference Group's website to look at things around what you can do for family violence. You can actually reach out and look at where are there organisations that we can connect in with who are doing well. I know a lot of the water businesses have done a lot of work in this space, and they're natural collaborators. So they are very happy to come together and provide guidance and information and just insights onto how they've done that work. And the community sector, we're all part of one community. So, we're all, like I said, we're all working with those same humans. We want to support your organisations to make sure you're supporting your customers. It's not an us against them thing here. It's we are one community. And if we are not working together, especially now and over the next few years, we're going to be in real strife. So there is lots of information out there, different case studies, different insights into supports and ways you can support people better. Looking at things like the National Debt Helpline as a referral service, actually engaging with your local community organisations. You'll all have local community organisations in your patch who are doing this work, who are seeing these clients. Look at partnerships. Look at and might I say, look at funded partnerships. We do want to make sure that we're actually ensuring that organisations that are contributing into your organisation are being funded to do that. So think through that lens of where are your connections? Are you hosting Bring Your Bills days, for example? A lot of Bring Your Bills days where people can come and ask questions are hosted in libraries and in community centres. So that's in your patch. So, you could be going along yourselves and setting up stands and figuring out, listening to the community, hearing their issues, being available to them, but also at that time talking to a whole range of these other organisations, because the only way we're going to do it is together. We can't get through this if we're all working in silos. We've all worked in organisations with silos. Now, I've never heard anyone say, gosh, a silo's handy. Like, gosh, silos are good. They are not good. So we have to get out of that mindset of where we've just got to follow our path and think about who else do we need to connect with and how do we do it. And, the webinar today, you're going to hear from different people who are offering support. You can reach out to us. There's other businesses here who have gone before you. I think nobody wants humans to be harmed. Nobody wants to do the wrong thing by our community. So there is a lot of resources and support available for those who want to be able to access that.
Just on the one-stop hub too, Kira. So we know a lot of the energy and the water businesses are members of that hub. So if councils wanted to, get more information or explore whether or not they could be part of the hub, are you the best contact for them to do that through?
Yeah, you can send them my details, and there's also a contact at Thriving, which is contact@thriving.org.au. I hope is our main email address, but I'm happy for anyone to reach out to me. So the One Stop One Story is really, it is that triage service where it's supposed to be through that lens of no matter where someone presents in our system for support, we've got to wrap around them no matter what door they enter. So if I ring my bank or my energy company, my water company, my financial counsellor, and I say, look, I'm struggling, I don't know how I'm going to pay my phone bill. I don't know what I'm going to do about my energy. I've got rates, up the wazoo. I don't know what I'm going to do about that. Through that one call, we connect them into the support programs of all of those organisations where they don't have to retell their story. They know they're going to get the help they need. And, there's things built into the hub, like from the hub, you can top up someone's credit if they've got a Telstra phone, so you can automatically add credit to their phone. So it's really around that collective impact model of all businesses coming together for the same purpose, wrapping around those humans that they're all crossing over. So anyone is more than welcome to reach out to us about the One Stop One Story Hub or the TCP partnership, but also just if you're looking for better practice, we're happy to point you in the direction, because we've got about 110 organisations that are partners of TCP and about 400 organisations across the country that we work with, and all of those organisations are happy to have a chat. They're happy to meet and talk through what they're doing, where they've gone wrong, where they've gone right, because we are all in it together. We don't want businesses to fail. We don't want our local government to be struggling and not being able to put services out there, right? We are all in this together. So how do we make sure that we're connecting in and getting the best outcomes for humans and your staff, and that organisations are doing it in a way that's really productive and efficient?
I know you need to rush off, Kira, and just before we move to the next speaker, we did have another follow-on sort of comment about that in terms of how do they go about sharing the info covering off privacy between utilities. So have you got anything you can share with us on that?
Yeah, look, anytime you're sort of crossing over with that, the most important thing is about privacy, security, consent, all of those things. So when we built the hub, it took about 1.5 years to co-design the hub, and we had every sort of, we had regulators, ombudsmen, peak bodies, organisations, community sector, and lived experience through the entire process. So there's a whole consent process that's built into the hub. So we capture certain details. So we don't capture address, for example. We capture the postcode. What we capture in the hub is very securely managed, and that privacy is managed through consent scripts. And we know some consent scripts are very confusing. When we did testing, we had Uniting VicTaz support us in testing some of our consent scripts with the humans that would use the service, and they were saying, gosh, it's complicated, which it is, but we've done a lot of work around that privacy and security, and we've had really positive outcomes. So all businesses are part of the hub have seen really positive outcomes for their humans, but also for their staff. the reduction in vicarious trauma has been enormous. And so privacy and safety is absolutely the key driver, especially, with the hub. The first pilot was family violence. So we had to build very stringent processes into that system. So it's how you do that sharing of information and data and what consent you're getting from those people, and then how you're storing that information. That's really critical. But we are seeing much more cross-sector sharing, and there's lots of different programs. The hub's one of them, but there are lots of different ways that you can be getting that sort of multi-sector support mechanisms for people, and connecting in with your community partners is such a great first step if organisations aren't already doing that, because like you, they work very closely within your community and they'll know what support your community is needing and the issues that they're facing.
Great. Okay, thanks so much, Kiara, and thanks for coming and having a chat with us today. I think we can move on to our next speaker now.
Thank you for having me.
Thanks. So next up, we have Hannah Cook, who's the Financial Inclusion and Vulnerability Manager from Recoveries Corp. Recoveries Corp operates as a contact centre specialising in receivables management solutions and insurance claims recovery services, with a keen eye from the perspective of a debt collector. Hannah will offer some insights into the field. So thank you, Hannah.
Thanks so much, and thanks for inviting me. It was a great honour to be a part of today's presentation, and I just wanted to acknowledge that I'm on Jara country, the land of the Dja Dja Wurrung, and for those of you who don't know, I'm based in Castlemaine, which is in the Mount Alexander Shire Council, so shout out to those participating today from that area. I was asked to comment around best practice today around collections, and I think there is a pretty huge misconception out there that debt collection agencies are only out for very strict business when it comes to debt collection practices. But in fact, I can share that even from a debt collection point of view, that engage and assist model and attitude has definitely seen our collection rates higher than ever. So as a business model, it's been fantastic for us as well. I'll just jump into the next slide. Yeah, so elements around best practice. So I'll quickly touch on all of these as we move through the pack. So first, I'll jump into values and culture. So we all know that values really set the scene and the standard for culture within an organisation, and it's really important to set up a really simple set of values so that staff can really connect into those values and then obviously demonstrate those values as a part of culture. So something that I always like to do when I join an organisation is think about, can you link every process that your organisation takes to the values and culture you want your organisation to represent in your community? This is a great little process to undertake because it does often, processes can often outlast values and visions and missions, right? So the same processes can be in place for decades without too much of a review. So it's a good opportunity always to see, can you link the purpose of and the outcomes of those processes? And cultural change can take decades too, so it's really important to have a really clear strategy around what you want your colleagues to demonstrate in business, and that everyone is aligned, because there's going to be a really hard cultural adjustment for some people if you're wanting to change the values and the culture that your shire or council is known for in the community, and that can be difficult, but it's certainly worth making sure that there's that follow through. So when we think about the next topic, which was recruitment, it's really important in the hardship space that you search for candidates that match your organisational values. So you really are looking for a personality style as well as skills and experience. Because if you don't have people in your collections team and customer service in general that can really connect and build rapport quickly with your customers, then it's going to be a much bigger battle to come to a mutual agreement and positive outcomes. Thanks. And we'll just jump into the next slide. Thanks. And again. Thanks. So around training, it's really important to invest and refresh. So how many times have we seen in organisations training packages designed or purchased and then they sit on the shelf and they're rolled out for the next, 5, 10, 15 years, and no one's really taken the time to see if the content is still relevant and is in alignment with today's expectations and cultural understanding. And I thought I would just share a little bit with you around the types of courses that we've been investing in recently. So for those who don't know, the National Debt Helpline actually run a free information session that runs for about an hour. And that is put together by Financial Counselling Australia. It's a fantastic session. So I regularly sign up groups from all over our organisation to attend this session. They will set it up especially for your team and your organisation. And it's a really good introduction to financial vulnerability. So even if you've just got customer service staff who might be the team that take most of the inbound calls for the council or shire, it really just gives that sort of holistic but brief approach. And feel free to contact me if you would like details on any of these that I mentioned. Financial literacy education, so it's a bit more in depth, but it really provides a really great knowledge base for those who might be in your collections, hardship or rates team. And of course, disappointingly, because of recent events, it's been more prominent that we are always investing more in the appropriate domestic and family violence training. And more recently, we've also introduced Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander cultural safety training for our team. And one of our biggest partnerships lately has been around trauma-informed practice for customer service. This is a really great training session because when we think about customers calling us up, and especially around money, and it can be such an awkward conversation for a customer to be having, let alone our own staff, that customers can present in an agitated or upset way, and that's because the money for them, there is certainly emotional attachment around their circumstances to money, and so things in that conversation can be triggering for the customer, but can be triggering for staff too. So actually, this training is designed to protect staff and customers to make sure that you can get the best outcome instead of maybe threatening to hang up the call because you don't want them swearing at you. It could actually be the way that we're conducting the conversation to make it a safer place for that customer and drop the chaoticness of that phone call. So it is really important with partnerships. I think one thing to really remember is that you don't need to be the expert in everything. That's why there are organisations out there that can really provide sound advice to you. And so as long as you've got someone who can coordinate all those different pieces of advice and make clear, quick decisions around how to implement some of that advice, I think that everyone's sort of on a better path. So again, just some examples of some areas that specifically impact customers that we've invested around with partnerships is training, also our RAP, and in fact, you know, I'm very proud to say that, you know, people, Indigenous people from our council have been quite involved in the RAP program for Recoveries Corp, financial vulnerability, diversity and intersectionality, right? So most people are actually impacted by not one issue, but sometimes it's like 5 or 6 or 7 issues. And every time that creates just another layer of issues that need to be explored and to be dealt with in order to make sure a customer gets through the other side of some of the challenges, but also so that you as their creditor can actually put forward the best plan and the best solution for them. So it's that trust is really important for them to disclose so that you can have as much knowledge as possible. And the other thing that we have invested in partnerships with specific to this topic is also linguistics. And just moving on to the next element is around engagement. Oh, sorry, actually, yes, go back. I have a chart, my one and only chart to show. But this is around, look, this is an important chart for a few reasons. The reason being is that I don't know if most of you have heard about the Rank the Bank survey that gets put out by Financial Counselling Australia, but they produce a survey and then they put together a report afterwards and send it across multiple different sectors in the finance space. So they do look at banks, they look at smaller financiers, and then they also look across the debt collection industry as well. Recoveries Corp is on this slide, but I have purposely chosen to redact our name, not for terrible reasons, but I wanted you to see the difference in the experience, right? So the Rank the Bank survey started in 2017 and was done 2 years after that. And then due to COVID, it hadn't taken place again until last year. What's important to understand on this slide is the partnerships are important, but you need to be really careful about who you're selecting to be a partner. So I can hand on my heart say, as an ex-client of many debt collection agencies, that whilst there seems to be a lot of talk about how they can deliver and understand hardship methodology and practices, that it is a tick the box exercise. So you really need to do your research around who is the organisation that you want to partner with in the debt collection space and consult with, right? So I know how tight resourcing is for councils and shires around debt collection. So you want to make sure that you're partnering with an organisation that supports your values, truly understands the legislation and the requirements that have been put onto your sector, and can be that support for you. So, you know, make sure that you can learn and share from each other, because they should be, you're paying them, they should be out there to not only do great things for customers, but to represent your council or shire in the best possible light. And now we can move on to engagement. Thanks. So being able to communicate effectively is obviously important. And so thinking about all the different methods of communication, the obvious ones, of course, are phone, email, SMS and chat functionality, but also Are your operating hours conducive to the hours that all of your customers are actually available and want to be able to communicate with you at? So, you know, I know that in my area there are a lot of shift workers because we have a couple of factories nearby, and also some remand centres as well. So it's important to understand what type of engagement is required outside 9 to 5, Monday to Friday, and what can your organisation do to support that. The other things to think about are language. So the national average literacy age is 12, and for financial literacy, it's a lot lower. So think about whether your letters and communications with customers actually reflect a simple and easy English approach. And think about whether it's worth investing time and thought into a linguistics expert to improve the understanding and the responses that you get from communications too. And my last item to really think through is around community and consultation. So, you know, Kira talked a lot about sharing knowledge, and she was very right around, you know, people who are really invested in this space do just want to do well for everyone, right? So everyone is happy to share. Everyone's really open. You know, a decade ago, any information from a debt collection agency would have been held very tightly guarded as commercial in confidence. But we've been really trying to, you know, smash the glass ceiling to say if we want really great outcomes for people, and that's, we say all people, then we need to share our ideas and see what best practice really looks like. And so it means understanding current community and financial issues. And I'm aware that, you know, councils and shires have really great community engagement teams. So it would be great to see and hear stories about how they're working with the rates teams to put together some really constructive, you know, training and info sharing sessions. Because things are always changing. So what was relevant last week won't necessarily be relevant this week. But the other thing that I wanted to make a point of is that Financial Counselling Australia and Financial Counselling Victoria are wonderful allies if you want to engage for feedback. So sometimes their feedback can be a little abrupt, but you know, it's really about wanting to spark that change and get us thinking better around how things can be done differently. And it's hard to research everything on a tight budget. So use your network to inform you and refer you to other experts. So, you know, just being able to know that someone in your community might have links to another area of specialisation that you can learn from is really important. So that networking, not only within council or with councils throughout Victoria and Australia is important, but just keeping those connections available and attending events, attending and engaging with peak bodies are really important. So yeah, thanks. I think that's me pretty much. Oh, no, it's not me wrapped up. Okay, I'll run through these very quickly, but I'm very happy to share with everyone. For anyone who wants a copy, is our financial inclusion commitments for 2024. So there's just 10, and so we're constantly wanting to review our internal resourcing to reduce time to outcome for customers. No one should have to wait longer when they're in a stressful situation anyway. We want to review accessibility of our hardship and vulnerability teams to ensure that accessibility remains high as possible via all communication channels. Research and review internal options for an Indigenous customer contact point with consultation to review appropriate training and structure to support that solution. and we're researching quite heavily around the Indigenous cultural education courses for all levels of staff. And I have chatted to our CEO. He knows he is on the list as one of the first people to go through that. And we are rolling out the trauma-informed practice for customer service training to all staff across 3 countries, and that is over 1,000 people. So, you know, that's something we've really invested in. We also want to make sure that our clients and other groups that we interact with have got easy pathways to receiving that training too. So we're coordinating that with our service provider. And we've started reviewing existing clients' processes and advocate for change where Recoveries Corp believes that improvements can make. Because there's no point in us feeling like we've got great processes if all of our clients we feel don't, and then it means that you know, we see our role as being advocates for change with our clients. So we do regularly consult to make sure that there can be improvements made. We want to review our branding. Believe it or not, Recoveries Corp doesn't always set the scene for a hardship conversation. So we're actually in the moment going through a rebranding thought process. And we want to continue and build or maintain relationships with industry partners to ensure continuous learning and advocacy, and continue running our social sustainability roundtables. This is something that we run about every 3 to 4 months, and financial counsellors, industry experts, corporates and community groups and government come along and share information, and we really want to advocate for best practice in those. So anyone is welcome. It doesn't matter who you are, who you work for, who you represent. In fact, we saw one of our competitor debt collection agencies register to attend last week, so we were proud of that. Yeah, I think that's all. Thanks very much.
Thanks, Hannah. Just, we're probably running a bit behind time-wise, but we've still got some time for some questions if people want to jot them in the Q&A or put your hand up. But perhaps one question for you, Hannah, is you obviously work across a range of sectors in terms of collecting debts. Mm-hmm. What do you see as being the most effective, I guess, way for or tools for thinking about debt recovery from your experience?
It's certainly having a full understanding of all debt recovery options. So, and pivoting with change too. So just as an example, you know, of course, there are always going to be customers that have got the capacity to pay, but for some reason are choosing not to, or maybe we're not able to get in contact with them. And so it's knowing when to pivot. A lot of the water organisations have gone away from the restriction of water services Kira mentioned before, but they've found that maybe caveats are working well for that particular group. And it's not, you know, they're a property-based service too, but what that's giving them is, you know, the notification process, even through the land titles office, that there has been a change made to the title, so which sparks engagement. You know, I find that knocking on doors and having a conversation is really impactful, and it's in a really friendly and collaborative way. Like, don't go dressed in uniform, like casual clothes and ID is fine, because you want to be engaging, not being seen as an authoritative figure coming to the door to scare people. But yes.
Thanks, Hannah. I don't think we have any other questions for Hannah, but there have been a couple of questions pop up about, I guess, the relationship between local government and other, I guess, taxes. So did we look at the interest rate charged on other government taxes, and also wouldn't it just be easier for the government to reduce the penalty interest rate? So I guess some of those issues are outside the scope of the advice that we were asked to look at. So You know, as I said, we had those 4 matters that we had to consider. I think we've also had some questions around the fire services levy and the potential for there to be 2 different interest rates applying on the rates portion of a ratepayer's bill versus the fire services levy portion of a customer bill. I think those are all important questions from a council perspective, but again, are sort of outside the scope of what we've been asked to do. So they're probably broader policy questions that are more appropriately directed to local government Victoria in terms of how those things might actually work in practice. So if there are no other questions for Hannah, no, it doesn't look like it. Thank you very much, Hannah, and we'll move on.
Thanks, Angelina.
Thanks. So we'll move on to our next speaker, who's April Uray. I hope I've said your surname right, April. So April is from Hobsons Bay City Council, and she's the leader of the rates team with a wealth of experience in local government. And April will share with us best practices from a council perspective. So I'll pass it on to you, April.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. So for those who don't know me, I'm April. I'm the team leader of the rates team at Hobsons Bay, having moved from a number of other councils in the past. I'd like to acknowledge every council that is out there trying to do the actual best that they can with what the resources that they do have. We are very much governed by people who are much higher than us. We only have what we are given to be able to work with. And often that means that we can't move to an assist model because we don't have the resources available to us. So perhaps there's a conversation that needs to be had with people much higher than just our level in rates, but not only with our higher than our finance managers to be able to do some of the things. I recently worked out that in the water board, there is almost 6 local councils per water board across the state of Victoria. And whilst it seems very easy to say that the water boards do a lot of things in-house, we don't have those resources available to us. So I'm here to talk to you about how we're handling rates arrears at Hobsons Bay City Council. Next slide, please. So for anyone who doesn't know, Hobsons Bay is situated on Hobsons Bay City Council is situated on Port Phillip Bay, 10 kilometres west of Melbourne CBD. We're approximately 66 square kilometres in size, so we're fairly small, and we have very limited undeveloped land. What we do have, we have bay frontage, residential areas, commercial precincts, a lot of environmentally significant open space, and we are home to some major industrial complexes, including our petrochemical industries, some of which have closed down. Next slide. So even though we are small, we have just under 94,000 people in our area. That's 1,460 people per square kilometre. So in parts of our shire, it is quite high density. We have higher than Greater Melbourne averages in every category of individual who is likely to own a property over the age of 35. 20% of our population moved to Australia in the 1960s or before, so it's quite a diverse community with a high level of immigration, and 30% of the population were born overseas, with 15% arriving in recent times. Next slide, please. So it's a very varied population. 33% of the population own their property with no mortgage, so there's quite a high level of wealth. There's 33% of the population who own their property with a mortgage, and just under 29% that are renting. The population that we have are more likely to experience higher levels of social and economical disadvantage, partially due to ethnic and language barriers. So a small percentage of our population live in low-income households, with 68% of this percentage being in their own home, and 58% of those don't have a mortgage. So what we're seeing is it's a lot of pensioners that are in our shire. They may have paid off their home, but they are considered low income. And 28% are in the private rental market or social housing. Next slide, please. During the slides haven't quite come across properly, but during COVID, council chose to put an interest freeze on anyone who contacted council regarding financial pressures, and it was automatic. You didn't have to say you had lost your job because of COVID. It was any kind of financial pressure, and it was an automatic freeze. Taking that one step further, we reversed all interest if a payment arrangement was entered into. So we've been doing interest-free payment arrangements well before it was mandated. We had an automatic rebate of a fixed amount to residential and commercial properties to assist during COVID. It sounded a lot better than it was. It was actually quite a low rebate once it all got split amongst everything, but something's better than nothing at the end of the day. We accepted any payment arrangement amount. Now, this meant that if someone said that they were only able to pay or willing to pay $10 a fortnight, we accepted it, and it was interest-free. And there were no legal account lodgements and only limited legal action on existing accounts. Next, please. Based on the minor impact of our rebate that was given the previous year, in the second year of COVID, we implemented a financial assistance program that focused on early intervention, support for individuals, and fairness and equality. Council engaged a community action group, and through that, we were able to allow a waiver of 25% of the current year rates and fire services levy if people could demonstrate a reduction in income of 30% or greater. 30% was chosen because it was what the government were using at the time for their assistance with COVID. We also allowed deferrals and previously mentioned payment plans. And our waiver program is actually budgeted. So it means that we have it as a line item, and it is a commitment by council that it is a continuing line item now that COVID has passed, and it appears in our budget every year. Next, please. But all of this put us in a pretty bad state for a council. So at the end of 22-23, coincidentally when I started with Hobsons Bay, we had a total collection rate of 86%. We had over $17 million in arrears spread over 7,000 assessments, or 16%. It was not a good outcome for council because it meant that that's money that council had budgeted for receiving that we can't spend because we literally don't have it. And there comes a time where you have to think about whether we have to start cutting services. Next, please. So as part of this and as part of the amendments to the Local Government Act in June last year, we introduced payment plans. So payment plans comply with the Act because we have to. They're available to anyone with an outstanding balance. They can be weekly, fortnightly, or monthly via various payment methods, and they're spread over a maximum of 24 months. One of the big things that we brought in with our payment plans, as opposed to our payment arrangements, and it seems really basic, but we monitored them. Because what I found was that a lot of people had entered into a payment arrangement and never done anything about it. But council had also never followed up on it. So out of sight, out of mind, not getting paid, which isn't the desired outcome for a ratepayer because it means that they are essentially not accruing interest, but they're continuing to accrue a debt as well as not a desired outcome for council. Next, please. We introduced a friendly reminder letter, and no one likes getting a reminder letter, but it is a very plain English letter. It is sent to anyone with a balance over, I think it was $100, it might have been $50, just reminding them of the outstanding balance. It gives them options to pay in full if they are able to, enter into a flexible payment plan, and they can apply for our assistance program or discuss an alternative with us because often a piece of paper is only so big and you can't list every individual circumstances. So people, if they have their own scenarios, we're willing to discuss it with them. We found that, next slide, please. Yep. So we found that a lot of people had just simply forgotten that they had a rates arrears. They got their bill, they forgot. We have only 4 instalments, so I'm not entirely sure how they managed to forget 4 times a year, but it highlighted a few different things. We also sent a flyer with all of our instalment notices, which for anyone who's has a balance outstanding of over $200 from a previous instalment. Our comms team designed it to be plain language. To just try and get people to make contact with us. As someone said earlier this morning, you can't get blood out of a stone, but a conversation starts balls rolling. And it means that we're able to engage with people. So we put it in, every time we send it out, we see a spike in engagement around payment plans with our ratepayers. It means that people can have a conversation with us. Often the conversations don't end in an instalment notice. It just ends in a, sorry, we forgot. Would you mind waiving the interest if I pay it up front? And that's fine. We'll happily waive the interest if it has the person paying it and if it's a good outcome. So next slide, please. One of the things we did was, and we had found, is we all get return mail. People forget to tell us that they moved house. It happens. You have a mail redirection for so long, you go, I'll do that one day, you never get around to it. We worked with our records management team to be able to keep some data on who was having return mail and how many items we were having returned to us. So we started to follow up on return mail through emails and text messaging, promoting our online form as the easiest way for people to update their details. From the people that we couldn't make contact because we didn't have a phone number, we didn't have an email address, or they just never replied, we worked with our collection agency to perform some data washing. Now, this is outside of scope of our legal action. It is something that we are just engaging them to do their services for a small fee for charge to council. It means that we will hopefully be able to get some up-to-date mailing information for people next time we send out an instalment notice, and to start that conversation before we even consider referring it on to a collection agency. Often we use skip traces. In the past, we've used skip traces quite a way down the rates collection process in legal, so we're just bringing it forward to try and have a better impact for ratepayers. Next, please. We have our early intervention collection works. So we all, as I said, we all have limited numbers. I personally have a team of 6, and it means that we can't do everything. I'd love to be able to have my team contact ratepayers by phone, by letter, send personalised letters. I'd love to have them out on the street. I had a running joke a little while ago that I was going to put a flag on their back in the community, much like the pace setters of a marathon that I saw running down Sturt Street yesterday. But I just don't have the resources available to me. And that means that I need to engage with my collection agency to do some of those works because they have the resources available. So they can send text messages, they can send emails, they can make phone calls. They also have the systems to be able to cope with the outcomes of those calls because we don't have those ideal systems available to us. When our collection agency does work for us, it's branded as council. It's without the threat of legal action and it's in plain language. And the aim is to get people on payment plans. The aim's not to, and I believe that there are very few councils out there where the aim is to get people through debt collection because we want to sue them and that's all we see. We generally want to work with people. I've always wanted to work with people and I've been doing this 16 years. We want to be able to get the best outcome for our ratepayers because quite often we live in the communities that we work in and we have to be able to face those people down in the supermarket. We have to be able to see them at the football match on Saturday night, or we went to school with them. We grew up with them. So we're not a nameless, faceless society at the best of times. We are human and we treat people like humans. even though sometimes we get it wrong, we all make mistakes in life, but sometimes if we had the information available to us, we're not that bad. Next slide, please. So our hardship provisions sit beyond our financial assistance. So if someone isn't able to repay their outstanding balance in 24 months, it looks into our hardship provisions. Like everyone, we are eagerly waiting the Minister's response so that we can actually design our new policy to be able to fit with that. We change it up a little bit at Hobsons Bay. We allocate anyone in our hardship provision into a separate ledger within our accounting system. It's not included in our calculations when we work out how much we collected for the year. So of the 86% that we were at the end of last year, the hardship provisions sit outside of that because we know that we are unlikely to collect that money through the year. It's reviewed annually for continuance. We don't ask that people refill in a form each year. They generally it's about making contact with them so that they know that we're here if they need us. And we can also check in with them to see maybe something's changed. One of the things that I found when I reviewed our existing hardship provisions is that a lot of people who were considered in hardship had actually paid out their debt. Now, that could have been through they sold their property, they came into a sum of money, but they weren't still in hardship. So we were basically allocating them incorrectly. And it meant that because we weren't reviewing it. So we have to do reviews regularly, and I choose to do it annually. And it's just a friendly letter, just checking in with them, nothing major. We tell people upfront that we will check in with them so they know to expect it, but they can also check in with us at any time through the year too. Next, please. And there's a few other odds and ends. So as Hannah said, training is always important. We've all had training that you go to and you think it's going to change the world, and then you get there and you're like, no, actually didn't really meet my needs. Our team were really unfamiliar on how to handle calls where the person was in financial difficulties, and we needed to provide some training. So now we have a focus on team meetings about skills building and hardship and how to have those difficult conversations, not only to have them, but to have them in a respectful manner so that we're not actually the ones escalating the situation. But also teaching my team on how to handle them and when to draw a line, because someone might be swearing at us and you might be trying to work with them. But I've got a duty of care for every one of my team. Council has a duty of care that they don't have to sit there and handle that abuse. They're having a difficult conversation, yes, but they don't have to take someone's abuse just because the person wants to dish it out on the day. We also looked at our website, what information we were or weren't providing, and it's started to improve the information. Often ratepayers can't contact us between 9 and 5, which is when we operate. They need information that is outside of those hours because they thought about it sitting on their couch at 9 o'clock at night. And that's when they do it. They have the time to be able to make those calls. We also started to review our forms, what forms were available and what forms we weren't comfortable with being available. We like to have a chat with people, whether it be online or verbally, before setting up payment plans to ensure that there is reasonable expectations on both sides for it. So next slide. And that's it. Sorry, I thought there was one more, but there's not.
Thanks, April. We got any questions for April? While we're waiting, I might just ask you a question, April.
Sure.
Just around, so obviously Hobsons Bay has been doing a lot in this space. Have you started to see any benefits from that in terms of your level of debts or in getting more money coming through or anything like that? Or is it still too early to see some of those?
When we sent out our friendly reminder letter in June, which was just after 4th instalment, in the space of 10 days, we managed to collect $4 million of our $17 million. So it was literally people who just forgot, had capacity to pay, forgot. And we found a lot of people had moved house or they'd signed up for electronic delivery of rates notices. And because I'll admit, I was just trying to do it the quickest and easiest way possible, I sent them via post. It meant that they realised they weren't actually getting their notices because they'd closed that email account or they were no longer monitoring it. So we started those conversations. So our payment plans, we're seeing a lot of people making payments regularly, which is great to see, and a lot of people having conversations with us. We recently went through a process of, we had a lot of people on direct debit that hadn't entered into a payment plan but could have been, had they had a conversation with us, they would be eligible to be considered a payment plan. So we just automatically enrolled them because we had previously been charging them interest when they didn't need to be. So, and we wrote to those people and just said, this is what we've done. No one's complained yet. So, but yeah. There was just one other thing that I wanted to bring up, and there's great ideas of how local government could help people. And whilst everyone has an opinion on how we should be doing things, often we don't know about them because no one actually thought to have the conversation with us. I would have loved to have been involved with Sierra's hub that she mentioned previously. And she mentioned that she spoke to key stakeholders, but I didn't know about it till today. And I monitor the RMA inbox because I sit there as the RMA treasurer and I don't ever recall seeing it. So often it's a case that we don't know what's out there because people assume that we know, but we all know what they say about assumptions.
And I think that that's an important point to make because you don't know what's out there. If you don't know, then you don't know.
Correct.
I think, a lot of the focus probably has been on other sectors. So, like we've talked about water and energy and maybe banking and insurance, but I'm pretty sure there'll be a lot of opportunities going forward for some of those conversations and for councils to kind of get involved in some of that sharing of better practice. Because, our experience in both energy and water has been that sharing of experience and practices has actually sort of helped across the sector in terms of the approaches. So one of the other questions I might just ask you, April, is do you think that, you talked about having limited resources. Do you think that, so some of that success that potentially you are seeing, is that going to help in being able to make those business cases around being able to invest in further invest in more proactive sort of credit management approaches? So, it's a bit chicken and egg, I guess.
It is chicken and egg. It depends on each council. I remember a few years ago attending a seminar and it was basically said by MAV that we need to be having these conversations about resourcing with our CEOs because ultimately they're the ones who are making the call.
Yes.
That I can come up with some great ideas, but I also know the amount of hours that I put in, and to put energy into one thing means I have to forego energy into something else.
Yeah.
So it's all well and good to do it once. To make it in sustainable and continuous action, we need resources. I don't know that I can sustain it in my current team numbers. And I'm pretty lucky that I have a team that is adequately resourced for what we need to do. There's many councils out there that are under-resourced. And I've been in small rurals where you are literally the only person that you have to outsource because you have no other option. So.
Yeah. Did I see someone pop up their hand and now it's gone? If you still wanted to ask a question, if you want to pop your hand back up or just put it in the Q&A. So this is probably a broader question across, not just for you, April, because I don't want you to talk on behalf of the sector, but a question that Hannah has asked is, has local government thought about their collective buying power for a reduction in partnership fees? You can then competitively compete for pricing against much larger organisations. So I guess that's a broader question for the sector and maybe the peak bodies in terms of, where are there opportunities maybe for councils to get together in terms of, some of these approaches and stuff. And I guess, you talked about the water boards or the water businesses having, covering a much bigger area, I guess. But, maybe there is scope for the local councils within that area to kind of get together and share the resources that they do have in terms of engaging, collection agencies and whatnot. But I guess that's a broader question for the sector. I don't expect you to answer, April, unless you have a view on how easy or not easy it is maybe to do some of those things within the sector.
From a practicality point of view, every council has a different hardship policy. Every council has different internal mechanisms. To be able to scope that out across them as a shared service, you want to make sure your services were in line. There are councils that are doing it for other areas. It's not something that's unheard of in the industry, but you want to make sure that you had very similar practices so that it was feasible. Because you'd hate for someone to be getting the wrong information.
Probably need to move on to our final speaker, but Jim, you did have your hand up, and then you took it down. So I don't know if you do have a question and you want to ask it now, we can unmute your microphone. Otherwise, we'll move on to our next speaker.
Yep, sorry. I was frantically typing away in the queue.
Oh, sorry.
It was sort of more of a statement, especially when we get to stuff about talking about resources. I think our council alone, well, not alone. I'm assuming again that most councils are in the same boat. But the last 3 or 4 years, in a rates capping environment, anytime I ask for resources, I pretty much get shut down. And what's happened in the last year as well with the change in the legislation and payment plans no longer being able to be charged penalty interest, it's not only decreased the penalty interest that we've been charging across the board on those properties, but because we're obviously telling customers go on a payment plan, avoid penalty interest, we've jumped from 800 to 2,900 people on payment plans this year alone. So the amount of penalty interest that we charge from last year to this year is a significant decrease. We're talking like $400,000-$500,000 on top of the bind on resources already. Has any of this been sort of discussed with the councillors as well, like the increasing pressures that are affecting council as well as their customers?
So I guess from the ESC's perspective, so it's obviously something that we're aware of, that councils, given that we administer the rate cap in a rate cap environment, are constrained. But I think you've pointed out that there's pressures also on ratepayers, and we talked before about you can't get blood out of a stone, and so it's trying to I guess we looked at it as sort of balancing those two things. So there's still an interest rate. You can still charge that interest rate in certain circumstances. Yes, it's lower than it was. There's requirements in the Act now around that 2-year period before you can take action in certain circumstances. But I think there's still scope within the Act for councils to take action against ratepayers who don't want to pay, as opposed to those who are facing sort of issues and are unable to pay. So we think we've kind of balanced all of those things. Take your point that our councils are probably constrained, but I think there's cost of living pressures across the community. So thanks, Jim. So maybe we'll go on to our last speaker, our last guest speaker, who's Joe Murdoch, the Managing Director from North East Water. So North East Water is a water utility company operating in Victoria. Jo brings with her a wealth of experience in engaging with customers, service agencies and councils to enhance the support provided to individuals having difficulty paying their bills. So over to you, Joe.
Terrific. Thanks so much, Angelina. And hello to everybody. Thanks for having me today. I'm somebody who's really passionate about supporting vulnerable customers. So I'm really keen to share my experiences and perhaps some reflections on from the perspective of the water sector, or at least my own experience of that. I would like to acknowledge, though, the traditional owners of the lands that I'm meeting on today and pay respects to elders past and present. I am sitting here in Wodonga, and it is shared land here. We between Duderowa Dargol, Duderowa, Waweroo and Yakmatang. So I want to thank them for the care that they have shown our land and waters over thousands of years. I might just get us to move. Who's somebody could move my slides for me? Thank you. Oh, doesn't quite come out, but that's okay. Just a little bit about myself. I have spent more than 20. I started my career with more than 20 years in local government. And the last 7 of them, I was on the executive at Yarra City Council. But prior to that, I was at the City of Kingston. If anybody's here from the City of Kingston, you'll know that's your beautiful 13 kilometres of coastline, which I fell in love with many years ago. I was at Whitehorse Council. I was also an LG Pro board member, and I've done a lot of consulting with councils over the years. So I feel as if a great love of mine was working in local government. But after most of my working life in local government, I decided to take the plunge and move across to the water sector. And I've now been in the water sector for about almost 8 years. Actually, it says 7 years there, but almost 8 years. I had 6 years as a general manager at Barwon Water, which is Victoria's largest regional water corporation. And really, my background was in customer service, customer support, including billing and debt management, business and infrastructure transformation, and government relations and a range of other services. But just over 2 years ago, I was fortunate enough to be appointed as the managing director at North East Water, and I've still retain my absolute commitment to supporting vulnerable communities. We here at North East Water, we cover a 20,000 square kilometre service region. We have an $82 million revenue base, and we, like you, certainly a strong focus on trying to reduce debt, for example, aged debt in these really struggling times for customers. Now, might move the slides. Just a quick reflection. I guess 7 years in water has given me plenty of time to reflect on the similarities between local government and the water sectors. And I have to say, I've brought a lot of great things into the water sector from my time in local government. But generally, the similarities, we both deeply care about the communities that we're serving, and we're all tackling major challenges like climate change, increasing costs of goods and services, the cost of living pressures being felt by our communities and our staff, and aging infrastructure. These all put a lot of pressure on businesses, so councils and also water corporations. And while there's many similarities, my reflection is that there are also some differences in how we go about supporting customers. And this is one that I'm really keen and passionate to talk to you about today. And that's the difference in the way that local government and water approach billing. Also, potentially how we support customers who are vulnerable. So in your case, your ratepayers, and by extension of this, how we manage debt. Now, and when I was in local government, I really never thought any differently about billing or rates until I'd actually moved into another sector, and it did give me a fresh perspective. And I guess had I known this when I was in local government, perhaps I would have looked to move towards this sort of model, which I'm about to share with you. I do want to say there's a disclaimer here, because I just heard April talk about some really good things that Hobsons Bay are doing, and I do believe that some councils are transitioning to this approach. I believe Whittlesea Council, for example, might be doing some of this in their business. But hopefully today I can inspire you to be curious about exploring the benefits for your councils about what I believe is a good model of proactively and supporting customers. So the first is around billing and managing debtors. I'll just move that slide if we can. Thank you. So in local government, generally, I understand that rates and debt management, it used to be the case when I was in local government, generally sits within the finance or corporate services group. But in water, billing and debt management mostly sits within the customer experience or customer service teams. I can talk about my experiences at Barwon Water and North East Water, and that's definitely the case. Finance does and definitely provide a supportive and advisory role. Billing, revenue and aged debt is included in all corporate financial reporting, of course. But the responsibility for billing and debt management sits and customer support sits within the customer experience team. And look, there are a number of benefits for that. The first is that the customer team are the well trained and the most able to provide the care, empathy, and support to customers simply because they've had the dedicated training around customer support. And I did hear April talk about, it was great to hear that your team had, the rates team had been receiving some training in how to help vulnerable customers. But this is really important, particularly when customers are having difficulty paying their bill or accessing services, that the people with the right training, it's often nuanced training, are actually helping them. They can take, not only can the person who's taking the call just take the call, they can also help them in the first instance rather than having to put them through to another department to actually have them helped. And in particular, if the person is vulnerable or experiencing any form of difficulty, whether it's paying their bill or accessing a service, the customer team can either help them there and then, or they can link them into a dedicated customer support program team. At Barwon Water, it was all the one thing. Customer experience could help with both customer support and with all general inquiries. At North East Water, we have a customer support team sitting within our customer team, so that the call would go to them. Customer team often has these softer skills, and these and this can also provide your first layer of debt management service. So this is a real, I guess, a proactive outbound calling program that we have here at North East Water, and I know we had it at Barwon Water. And that is that's predicated on the fact that restrictions, enforcement, and legal action through debt collection agencies are treated as a last resort for those who won't pay. And I should mention we don't charge interest in the water sector. But I want to give you an example on the next slide, which just talks a little bit about what we're doing here at North East Water, but it was a similar program at Barwon. We were seeing our debt rising. There's no doubt about it. We put a new billing system in, and we could start to see our age debt was rising. So what we did is we employed two collection officers, and instead of sitting them in the finance team, we sat them in the customer support team, and we trained them, provided all the soft and important skills that a customer team service team would have. And basically, they sit within the customer support team and they make proactive outbound calls. They have that customer service ethos, the skills and the training. Where they will also help customers with customer support programs, or where it's a really complex situation, they'll put it through to the customer support team, which sits right next to them. And I have to say, just within less than 12 months, they had recouped, those two officers had recouped something like $2.2 or $2.3 million. We're so pleased with the result that we're actually putting two more recovery officers on. So, and that's basically saying that if we didn't put them on, we wouldn't recoup that money. So we're actually paying for that out of the recouped money so that we can continue to grow that. So when I hear about resourcing, I absolutely understand. Leaders have to balance those challenges around resourcing. But in this case, I'm really particular about saying, well, we would have to we wouldn't be able to recoup some of this money at all. So by putting those recovery officers on that trained in the customer service skills, we've been able to recoup some significant money. And I have to say customer satisfaction and trust continues to remain high. Now, I am not speaking on behalf of Barwon Water, but I was there for 6 years, and Barwon Water is sitting as the number one trusted water corp, and they have been doing so for several years now. And one of the reasons, I believe, for that is the way they manage their debt without going to debt recovery officers and without going to third-party debt collection agencies and restrictions only as an absolute last resort. Might move on to the next slide. Customer support. I talked a lot about the customer support program. So in the water sector, we generally have customer support teams. And at North East Water, that is anywhere between 2 and 4 people. And they are, it's a dedicated program. And it's administered by trained staff and with customer service skills. And at North East Water, for example, we've got a range of programs. We've got payment plans and extensions, community rebates, leak reduction grants. We actually connect our customers to concessions. So we help a lot of people with actually making sure they get their concessions. We also have grants which are called utility relief grants. And for example, customers can claim $650 through the utility relief grant. And we support them through that. We have small business grants, and some water corps have things called arrange and save plans, where if you pay one bill, so if you pay all your quarters, then you might get the fifth one would be waived. We don't have that at North East Water, but I know there's some examples of that in the water sector. But I think it's really important when designing your customer support programs to listen to customers, because they are the experts of their own experience. So if you've got staff designing your policies and programs based on their own lived experience, they may not be understanding truly around vulnerability and what that and really what needs to be included in your programs and policies. For example, on the next slide, this is something we're doing at North East Water, and more than happy to talk to somebody if you're interested. But we're developing our fair practice customer support strategy to improve the support we provide. So in the past, we would develop our plan to support customer vulnerability based on the lived experience of the support staff that were providing it, the customer service staff that were providing it. But this time we are doing some deep engagement. We've interviewed 15 vulnerable customers to really understand their lived experiences. We're workshopping multiple workshops with a total of 16 support agencies. We also had the CEOs of 8 agencies from across our region come and meet with our board, and they had dinner with our board, and we did a workshop with them to ask them what we needed to put into not only this strategy but our corporate strategy. And we've also done some broader customer surveys just to also test with our broader customer base. And that feedback from that engagement has been included into our corporate strategy as well. And so in conclusion, I just wanted to, I hope I've been able to impart with you just a different way of doing things. For all of us, we know care and support for vulnerable customers is an absolute priority. But I truly believe now, having seen a number of different models, the customer teams are ideally placed to proactively manage debt in the first instance, and enforcement should be seen as a last resort. And so I'd encourage you to think about how you can expand your customer support programs or your collection, in-house collection programs. And for example, as I mentioned earlier, our inbound collection program does proactive outbound calling to at least just connect with customers and bring them into our customer support program if needed, but also help bring in revenue. So on that note, I might finish, and happy to take questions. Thank you.
Thanks, Jo. So one of the questions, well, there's 2 kind of related questions, but so one of the questions we have got come through is around how many staff does North East Water have in their customer support teams, and then how many assessments do you have? And then related to that is when you added the 2 additional staff members, are your paying customers now paying higher fees to cover those positions?
They're all really great questions. So we've got about 205 staff in our whole organisation. The customer support, there's two recovery officers. We're just about to put 2 more on, and on contract basis, so not permanent. And our customer support team has 4 in that team. Now, have our prices gone up? No, they haven't. So we've made a commitment. We have an 8-year price period where we set our prices in advance, and we stick to those prices. So any additional costs that we're incurring as a business, we would absorb into our business and look for efficiencies to be able to pay for that. So, I mean, the first thing is we would lose some of that revenue because we're actually not getting, if our age debt keeps going up, we may lose that revenue anyway. So I see that's as a good way of bringing that revenue in. But the other thing is we're on a mission here to be more efficient as well, and to look for other ways that we can reduce our operating costs, and we've so far been managing to do that. But it's a really difficult environment at the moment with so many customers that are presenting as vulnerable, and the last thing they need is legal, restrictions and legal action against them, without us doing everything we possibly can to reach out to them and support them.
Thanks. I'm just mindful that we're running a bit behind time. I don't think we've got any other questions for Joe. No, you're not.
Angelina, I'm happy for anyone to reach out to me if they want separately.
I was going to say,
yeah,
maybe if the speakers are happy, and we'll check with everyone before we do it anyway, but when we send out the slides or the recording, we might also give people some contact details if there's, if people want to follow up and have some of these kind of conversations. One more question did come in, which could be an interesting one from your perspective, Joe. So if you went back to local government now, having learned what you've learned, I guess, in the water sector, what would you do differently?
I would definitely look at introducing this approach where billing and collections sit within a expanded trained up customer team. But I think to April's point is so important. I mean, you absolutely have to get your counsellors on board with it. This is a totally different approach to managing debt and really customer support. So you need to get your counsellors, your executive on board, and it needs to be led from the top, because you need to think differently about how you resource these really important services.
Yep. Okay. Thank you. Well, I think so that's it in terms of the formal presentations, and we appreciate the insights and input from all of our presenters. So thank you, Joe, April, Hannah and Kira, for your important contribution today, and thanks everyone for all your questions. If there are any other issues you want us to sort of think about, or what you want to get in touch with us, you can have a look at the ESC's website, and you can also reach out to us on the local government email address, which hopefully is up on the screen. So localgovernment@esc.vic.gov.au. We're always happy to meet with councils or the peaks to discuss issues relevant, I guess, to rate capping or anything to do with the hardship and the maximum interest rate. So now I'm going to pass us to Marcus, and he's just going to give us, I guess, some thoughts about some of the discussion that we've had today and reflections. So, Marcus.
Thank you for everyone that's attended today, and really thanks for Kira, Hannah, April and Joe for a diverse and really interesting set of presentations. I found it quite informative and useful. I really hope that those out there listening, it was something we were asked to do as part of this work, was to use it as an opportunity to hold some discussions about what is better practice in credit and debt management and what may be learning. One thing I I reflect on was April saying she hadn't heard about the Thriving Communities Partnership with the One Stop One Story Hub. I guess that's one of the things in this work and the advice we've given to the Minister on hardship policies is making those things aware. I think in our work, we've probably found increasingly over time that cross-sector approaches work extremely well for hardship, financial management, family violence and economic abuse. So really one thing out of reflecting on today, if you think there is benefit from the Commission running future webinars like this or inviting you to the work we do in areas like hardship and family violence, why we primarily regulate energy and water, we get a lot of insurance, banking sector, come along to those sessions we run. So if people think you'd like to hear us or have us work, I know Mav was talking about organising some sessions as well, about what's good practice. One of the things I've found over the years in some of the work we've done more is just sitting around and hearing something going, well, that's interesting. We could do something like that. I'll take that back and try it in with my customers. So if there's anything you think we could do of running further sessions like this as to help people implement or consider. I take also the resourcing issues did meet myself and former CEO with the CEOs of the councils almost 2 years ago on this. There was pretty strong support then from a lot of CEOs about adopting more proactive approaches. There are, as spoken about earlier today by Kira and others, there are very strong business cases for a proactive approach and getting money in earlier. That is, money available to you. It's also far better for ratepayers rather than incurring interest, late payment fees, or even things like costs of summons. So, I think we got some really great examples from April of good practice that is occurring in local government. I think Joe's presentation again reinforced those opportunities that there are learnings across sectors and that things can be done. But if there are things you think the Commission as hard-headed economic technocrats could be raising with your CEOs or mayors about these approaches actually are beneficial all round in that they bring in more money earlier, but also do assist ratepayers, we're happy to probably look at any of those opportunities to take up. As a couple of speakers have had, I think we'll be happy to pass on details if anyone does want to follow up with the organisations that spoke today. If you heard something today thinking that's interesting, perhaps I'd like to consider it further, we'll make those contact details available. I really do appreciate, I think there was a lot of significant learnings out of today. This is something we're certainly not in the story of saying interest rates shouldn't be charged or there shouldn't be a proactive approach to debt management. Indeed, we really strongly urge proactive approaches and early intervention across all sectors we're in, and we really want to minimise outstanding debt balances as far as possible. So in doing this work, we're not trying to make life harder for councils. As I mentioned at the start, we will be putting forward our advice to the Minister this week. What the Minister does with that advice, I guess, is up to her, whether she accepts it, modifies it. That's her. We don't know when the Minister will release the advice, that this will go off. Again, that's her control, not ours, and how frequently we give advice. We've suggested yearly, take on board the suggestions at end of March, might be better than end of April for your budgeting purposes. We'll follow up with the Minister and the Department on those type of suggestions. Just recapping, I really sort of say that we're really interested in a lot of work we do in this space is very much in a co-design opportunity where we do work. And as we've seen today, perspectives from the community sector, from the debt collection agency, from local government and from the water sector. This is like the way we tend to run work in the financial hardship, family violence spaces, and really like to do more of that with the local government sector if you're open to that and look at ways that we can improve collections and how ratepayers are treated and looked after. But also, we probably always say we don't have a problem with you going after those that won't pay or are seeking to exploit the system, and interest rates and even ultimately penalty rates will still be available in those circumstances. But it's probably channeling those that are facing financial difficulty in a pretty tight economic time that we're looking after those people and channeling them to appropriate assistance programs and appropriate support either within the council or within the broader government framework. So again, I really thank you all for coming today. I think it's been a very interesting session. Please follow up with us or the others if there's anything you want to take up out of today, and thank you all for being here.
Yeah, yes, thanks everyone. So that's the end of the webinar. So as we said, we'll send out the recording probably tomorrow, and yeah, the advice will go to the minister tomorrow as well. So thank you everyone.
Thank you.